So, an argument I often run up against from Marxists whenever central banking or the Federal Reserve is brought up is that central banking is an inevitable consequence of free market capitalism. Now, it generally starts like this. The Marxist will blame the 2008 financial crash on free market capitalism. For example, I've talked about Richard Wolff before. He's one of the most prominent Marxists in the US today who is a professor at the New School in New York, and nearly every time you hear him speak about capitalism, he will say something along the lines that people are by and large more and more weary about capitalism because it was so obvious that capitalism was at fault for the financial and housing crash in 2008. And as I've said before, he doesn't even attempt to bring up the Federal Reserve's interest rate or monetary policy, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the Community Reinvestment Act, etc. The list of government initiatives are a mile long. Richard Wolff just brings up the fact that there were people operating within the financial industry that were behaving irresponsibly while completely ignoring the entire government-infused context in which they were operating, right? It's very simple. Without the government doing what they were doing, you would not have had a situation where acting irresponsibly and recklessly would have even been profitable. Again, Richard Wolff doesn't even attempt to bring this up, or at least I have not seen it yet, and I've scoured through many of his videos. And if he was extremely confident in what he was saying, he should at least do what I'm doing here in this video. I'm going to bring up some arguments made against my position, and I'm going to respond to them. I am still waiting for Richard Wolff to bring these points up and respond to them in a succinct, precise manner. I want him to tell me how the Federal Reserve, Community Reinvestment Act, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Barney Frank's initiatives didn't play a role, or at least how that role was minimal. I will be waiting. But unlike Richard Wolff, people in the YouTube comments, especially on his videos that I have commented on, have actually had an answer for me, and it generally boils down to central banking being an inherent part of capitalism, that it is an inevitable thing to happen within capitalism. Now, this is interesting for several reasons. The first is extremely strange. And that is, as I said, that Marxists will blame capitalism for the creation of central banking, as incoherent as that is. But meanwhile, if you take a look at the Communist Manifesto, central banking is plank number 5 in the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx almost perfectly describes an organization with all the characteristics of the Federal Reserve, and he directly advocates for the creation of such an entity. It would be as if I, a supporter of the free market, relentlessly going on diatribes against the government, all of a sudden change position and praise a person that advocates for every government program under the sun, and in fact wrap my identity up in that person's very name, as Marxists tend to do. I see Marxists blaming capitalism for central banking, when it is Marxist doctrine itself that directly calls for it. This is what you call incoherence on a grand scale. Secondly, Marxists are giving a subtle admission that, okay, it was not free market capitalism that caused these problems, but rather they admit it was the role the central bank played, but they say that's an inevitable outcome of capitalism, so therefore they blame capitalism. This is like eating a poisoned apple and blaming the apple itself instead of suggesting that maybe we should just not poison the apple. But also, I take issue with this for another reason. If a central bank is an organization that is inevitable, then how does that make any sense given that we've had 2 national banks before the Federal Reserve, both of which were killed off or didn't have their charters renewed? Let's not pretend that central banking is an inevitability that cannot be avoided. Not to mention that the population of people that are becoming aware and angry at the Federal Reserve is growing, and if that trend continues, especially if we were to get a full audit of the Federal Reserve, you could easily see the Federal Reserve becoming a thing of the past someday. I wouldn't say that it would happen soon, but someday it could certainly happen, which would put us far more in the realm of free market capitalism than we are now. And judging by the Marxists that admit the Federal Reserve was a large part of the problem, if we got rid of it and were more aligned with free markets, in a very odd twist, it seems like Marxists would be happy about that, and they would freely admit that, okay, yeah, now that we're more aligned with free market capitalism and we don't have the Federal Reserve, which is something we blamed before, the probability that we're going to see another decline like we did in 2008, the probability of that would go down. I think that is worth pointing out. After all, they don't seem to be blaming free markets. They're blaming what they think are inevitable government constructs that stem from free markets. But instead of joining the group of people that are against all this, they instead join the ranks of Marxists, whose 10 commandments directly call for the very thing they claim to hate. Baffling. But that has to be it for now. Please like and subscribe if you like this content, and you have a good one.